In the narrow alleys of Cebu City, where the air smells of dried fish and the walls are patched with hope, lives Lolo Marco Dela Cruz, a 52-year-old war veteran with one leg, a wounded heart, and a gentle soul. Every morning, he sits outside his tiny bamboo hut, fixing broken radios for a few pesos. The old man wears the same faded shirt every day, its collar torn, his hands trembling from both age and pain. Yet, his eyes still hold a quiet glow, the kind that only comes from a man who has seen both war and miracles. Years ago, Marco was a Navy rescuer, the kind who'd jump into storms to save strangers. But one fateful night, a boat explosion took his comrades and his leg. After that, the world moved on, but he didn't. No medals. No honor. Just silence. Still, every night, he would take his cracked guitar and sing under a kerosene lamp. His voice was soft, heavy with emotion, as though each lyric carried a memory. Sometimes children from the neighborhood would gather and listen, their faces glowing in the dim light. One stormy night, while singing, "You Raise Me Up," a tourist filmed him and uploaded it online. Within days, millions watched the old man's trembling hands and tearful eyes. The story of a forgotten Filipino veteran spread like wildfire. Then came the call, "Sir Marco, America's Got Talent wants you." He didn't smile, he just bowed his head, whispering, "Salamat, Lord." Before leaving, his neighbors embraced him. "Make us proud, Lolo." And as his jeepney rumbled away, his reflection in the window was half tear, half smile, a man too broken to dream, but too faithful to stop believing. The bright lights of Los Angeles were too much for his weary eyes. The AGT stage felt like another world, shining, loud, full of dreams. Marco, dressed in a simple white polo and worn-out shoes, wheeled himself forward. The audience went silent. Simon Cowell looked at him curiously. "What's your name, sir?" With his gentle accent, he replied, "I am Marco Dela Cruz, from the Philippines, a retired Navy man." Simon smiled slightly. "Welcome, Marco. What will you do for us tonight?" Marco held his guitar and said softly, "I will sing, not for fame, but for the soldiers who never came home." The hall grew still. The first chord of "You Raise Me Up" echoed, and the old man's trembling voice filled the room. It wasn't polished, but it was real, soaked in years of suffering and faith. As he sang, the crowd leaned forward, some holding their chests, others quietly crying. When he finished, there was silence, the kind that happens before the soul breaks. Then, the entire theater erupted in applause. People stood, cheering through tears. Simon looked down, eyes glistening. "That was pure heart," he whispered. Marco lowered his head humbly, whispering, "Thank you, sir, for listening." It wasn't just a song that night. It was a prayer, one that reached every corner of that stage. The applause faded, but the emotion lingered. Simon Cowell leaned forward, his voice softer than usual. "Marco, I have judged thousands of performances, but what you just did, that was not performance. That was truth." Howie Mandel nodded. "You didn't just sing, you made us feel everything you've lived through." Sofia Vergara wiped her tears. "I saw your pain, your kindness, and your courage. That is real talent." Simon took a deep breath. "Marco, the world needs to see men like you, men who never give up." Then, with one swift motion, he pressed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti exploded in the air. Marco covered his face, shaking, tears pouring down his cheeks. The audience chanted his name, "Marco. Marco. Backstage, crew members were crying too. A young Filipino staffer hugged him and said in Tagalog, "Para sa bayan," to Lolo. "This is for the nation, Grandpa." Simon stood and walked to him, shaking his hand. "You are a hero, on and off the stage." Marco whispered back, "Thank you, sir. Maybe, my voice still has a purpose." For the first time in decades, he felt seen, not as a broken veteran, but as a man whose heart still had music left to give. The next morning, Marco's story flooded the internet. The YouTube video titled "Filipino Veteran Brings Simon Cowell to Tears" reached 80 million views in 48 hours. People shared it across the Philippines, from Cebu to Manila, Davao to Baguio. News anchors called him the voice of hope. Children in schools drew pictures of him. Churches prayed for him. Veterans saluted his courage. The President of the Philippines even sent him a message, "You reminded us that service never ends." Marco sat in his small hotel room in Los Angeles, staring at his old guitar. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "So this is what it feels like to be remembered." He wasn't used to luxury, the bed was too soft, the air too cold, but his heart was full. He looked at his phone, flooded with messages. One said, "Lolo Marco, you made my father, also a veteran, cry for the first time." He closed his eyes and smiled. "Salamat, Lord. You turned my pain into light." That night, he knelt by his bed, prayed softly, and thanked every soul who still believed in kindness. Finals night arrived. Marco sat backstage, holding his rosary. His hands shook, but his heart was calm. He would sing a new song, one he wrote himself, titled, "Hope Will Carry Us Home." When he appeared on stage, the lights dimmed to gold. He began singing, his voice fragile but powerful. "Even when the storm won't fade. Even when the nights are long. Hope will carry us home." The big screen behind him showed old photos of Filipino soldiers, families, and children smiling. The audience cried openly. By the final note, Simon stood first, clapping through tears. "Marco," he said softly, "you've given the world something precious, faith in humanity." Marco looked up, smiling through his tears. For every Filipino, for every soul who lost hope, never stop singing. He raised the Philippine flag high, confetti rained again, and the crowd shouted his name. As the lights faded, the narrator's voice whispered, "A Filipino veteran's journey, from pain to purpose." And in that moment, millions around the world didn't just watch a performance. They witnessed a miracle born from humility, faith, and one old man's song.